So today, as Scott said, we'll be chatting about the hidden costs of customer data operations, but we'll also be talking through what customer data ops actually is, why it matters, but specifically like the scenarios that you actually need to consider when thinking about customer data ops. We'll talk about how to really scope down what's important to you as a company and what's important to your data architecture. We'll talk through composability, what's challenging about it, what's beneficial about it, and then we'll talk through what I'm most excited about is the Amperity features that come along with customer data ops. So we'll chat through what Amperity has been working on in the last year to make it a lot easier to use the system, but also to connect all of your data together in your architecture. And then I'm hoping we have time at the end for a couple questions for Q&A. So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself and the things that I've been working on at Amperity. So my focus right now is really working on getting Amperity successful for two main personas that kind of feed into that operator persona, which is why you're all here today, and the IT breakout for IT and engineering users. So first, I want to chat through our implementers versus our operators, which have a lot of overlap against each other, but they're a little bit different and a little bit nuanced. So our implementers are those people who are kind of coming in from day one, building out their foundation of Amperity, really figuring out kind of what use cases are required to run on Amperity, what data is required to bring into Amperity, and kind of what does that look like end to end, again, like that day one use case. Then our operators are coming in maybe a little bit later, keeping that run state, keeping the lights on. They're making sure that workflows are successfully running. If there are any errors, they're able to fix those errors really quickly, run resolutions on them, and really focus on making sure that you can make changes quickly and efficiently. There's a lot of overlap between these personas. This is like a massive Venn diagram. These might be two different people at your company. They might be the same person. They might be like two different teams. But they're all really focused on the same thing, which is really being successful on Amperity. And I'm really focused on getting them to value faster. So we'll be talking through some of the things that we've been launching that really impact this. But before we get started, I wanted to hone in on what data ops actually are and why it's important especially for our IT users. So I want to start out by kind of level setting with customer data management at its core, at its foundation. Hopefully this is pretty familiar with everybody that's here. Typically when users come to Amperity, they have some use case. And that use case might be, for example, driving higher value purchases for repeat customers. So what happens when you have a use case? You need to ingest that data, right? You ingest that into whatever tool that you're using for customer data management. But then once you have that data, you actually need to build your customer profile. You start identifying who your customers are. You're maybe running that data through some models. Maybe that's for identity resolution. Maybe you're doing predictive modeling on that. You're kind of building out like that initial stage. It's a lot of what those implementers and those operators do. And then those users, or maybe an analyst or any user at the company, is validating and making sure that that data is accurate and that's right. So we can start to actually activate on it and activate on the data that matters. We start to actually build out our audiences. We start to then orchestrate that data down to our downstream systems. And at some point, we do some analytics. Maybe it's after data leaves Amperity. Maybe it's while it's still in Amperity. But what's most important here is that this is not a straight line. This is a cycle on purpose. If it was all a straight line, this would be a lot easier. We probably wouldn't be talking about customer data ops today. And so at each stage in this cycle, everything kind of feeds into each other, but it's going to repeat. It's going to be replicated across any use case that you have. It's going to be replicated every single day when you're bringing in more data, more use cases, more data sources. Maybe you're changing models around. Maybe your source connector changed. And there's always going to be things that kind of impact this continuous cycle. No matter what this looks like for you, it might be one tool. It might be multiple tools. It doesn't really matter as long as you think about it as one architecture that needs to seamlessly work together. If you impact one piece of this, it's going to impact everything else. It's all a cascading effect. And as we see more and more companies coming in with more and more data systems and more disparate data sources, it's really important to have scalable data ops for our customer data. It enables this cycle to move quicker. Any change that happens this cycle has the least amount of impact on anything later on in the cycle. And that's really important, again, no matter what your architecture might look like, this is really important for that foundation. Which kind of brings us into, when you move beyond this foundation, what are all the things you need to think about beyond just making sure that this cycle runs? There's a lot of things in there, one, to make sure that it runs, but also what you can do for when it breaks or when you need to go and fix something. How can we make that easy as possible for you? So I kind of refer to these as the forgotten jobs. Hopefully they're not too forgotten, or maybe you don't know about them, but hopefully after this session today, you won't forget them. So we'll be talking through some things around data quality control, data management, change management, some ops on top of that, and then security and compliance, which I know is everyone's favorite topic. So I wanted to walk through some scenarios to consider when you're thinking about customer data ops. There is a lot here, so don't try to take notes on every single thing. I encourage you to think about what is most important to you and what's important to your data architecture, but also thinking about the specific problems that you're trying to solve and the specific problems that your teams are trying to solve so that you can focus on the things that make the highest impact and make you the most successful. So first, starting off with that data quality and control piece. So this is kind of all about taking a look at the data that you have and making sure that it's not only accurate, but you're able to filter out to the data that matters the most to you. So this might look like making sure that you're filtering out any fraudulent data, you're filtering out any bad data, any dummy data, but it's also making sure that you have the right ways to actually know what's your dummy data or your fraudulent data or your bad data, and you're really focusing on the data that's highest value to you. This is also about having kind of control and transparency about what data is actually in your architecture. So what's flowing in, how is that kind of changing within your architecture, and then what's flowing out. And then also making that really accessible to everybody. So where's your data dictionary living? Where is that glossary of terms? How do I know all the data within my company? It's a big problem that we see when we're working with new customers is them honestly just trying to find all of the data that they need to bring into their CDP. So how can we have that all in one place? The next scenario that I want everyone to consider about is data management and data architecture management. This is kind of all about having different tools that need to work together, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on as well. But this is all about when you have different tools that need to work together, you're probably also going to have different teams and different people that need to work together as well. So you need to think about, right, do I have too many tools? Do I have too many teams? Am I at risk of one person leaving and then leaving a black hole of knowledge in my data architecture? It's pretty high risk. So this is all about understanding kind of, do the teams that own all of my different systems actually work well together, and do the different tools in my system work well together on their own? Next is change management, which is a little biased. This is the one that kind of is the biggest thing for all of this in my mind. This is all about when you are making new changes, how can you test those changes to make them actually work, or that you have the confidence to know that the changes that you're making to your data architecture are going to work later on. And when you think back to that cycle that we were talking about before, how can I actually test out that cycle? How can I make sure that everything that I'm doing has the outcomes that I actually want, and it actually has the data is still valuable for all of my teams, and I'm not running into any issues later on where my data isn't delivering or my campaigns aren't running. And so it's really important to think about, do I have a testing environment? Do I have a stage environment? Do I have a production environment? And are those different? And can I work with them independently without impacting each other? Next, about our ops and processes is really kind of about, again, that workflow management piece. So how much of your team is spending time debugging issues instead of creating net new use cases? How often are there failures, and what's that time to resolution? Is it hours? Is it minutes? Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it months? This can be a huge pain point, but even more than that, you have to know when something's failing. If it's a month until you realize that your data is out of sync, or it's a month until you realize that things aren't working exactly as it should, it's probably not great. So who is getting alerted on these things? What email are alerts and errors going to, if at all? And then the last one here, again, everyone's favorite thing, security and compliance. It's really important to remember and to think about security and compliance, but you need to think about what's important to you. Are you most important to remember how CCPA and GDPR is working, that you maintain compliance there? Are you thinking more about your users who are utilizing the data? Are they having PII access? Are they not? Are you wanting to segregate data and data access by brand, by geography, by region? What does that all mean to you, and where do you need to be most secure? Where do you need to be more compliant, especially based on your industry and the data that you're working with? And then that kind of leads into what I was chatting before about the data management and data architecture around different tools. I have to talk about composability, right? Again, whether or not you're using one tool or multiple tools, it's really, really important to think about how all of these tools work together. And if you're using a different tool for every single part of your data architecture, you need to make sure that the tools that you're working with actually integrate really, really, really well with each other. And so when you have multiple tools, there's just additional questions you need to ask yourself to make sure that you maintain a successful data architecture and maintain that scalability, right? So how are you actually monitoring workflows against all of these different phases of your architecture? How many different teams do you need to deal with who kind of own all of this stuff? And again, are those teams that live in completely different places of your company that don't even talk to each other? It's pretty common. How do you actually validate that something that you're doing in your ETL layer is or isn't impacting something in your modeling layer or in your analytics layer, and how can you really understand how all of these pieces actually flow? If you need to roll back a change, it takes a really long time to coordinate that throughout all of these different pieces of your architecture. And so it's more than likely that you are using more than one tool, but you really need to make sure that you're choosing things that really fit together. I loved hearing this morning about the Databricks and Amperity partnership, right? We make sure that these tools work really well together, which really just feeds into the story and ideally kind of lifts up some of these questions that you might have and make them a little bit easier to solve. And thinking through all these scenarios too, really focusing again on the problems that you're actually having. Otherwise, you're going to be focusing on way too much stuff, focusing way too much of your time against scenarios that may not matter to you. All of these customer data ops, they all come with people who need to manage them. They all come with tools that you need to think about, not only from a cost perspective, but also just a cognitive load of making sure that everything works. And so it's really important to make sure you're using tools that kind of feed into making sure that you have good data ops and you don't even have to think twice about it. Which brings me to Amperity, which is why we're all here today. So we ran some calculations, and we actually saw that using Amperity, when you're building with Amperity, instead of building on your own with the features that we offer you today, it's actually 70% faster to onboard to Amperity, and almost 90% faster to make changes to Amperity. So we're going to walk through some of the different things that we've been launching in the last year that actually allow these numbers to be as great as they are. So we'll walk through some specific features, things to think about for those features, and then also how Amperity helps. And all the stuff that I'm showing today, too, are things that you can totally do yourself on your own, which is really awesome. So first, starting off with PII and compliance. It's important to remember that customer data is going to have PII. There's going to be customer names. There's going to be phone numbers and addresses and email addresses. And any tool that you're using needs to be able to handle this. And so that's not only things like CCPA and GDPR, but it's things like understanding who's having access to what, and how can I actually track that in case there's any malicious activity. For Amperity, not only do we work with you to delete compliance records and maintain compliance with CCPA and GDPR, but we actually help you really manage the users that you have in Amperity. So you can see here, you can add on restricting PII access, restricting download access for certain users, restricting data export for certain users, which is really easy and really easy to maintain that granular control of the features within Amperity and the data that you have within it. We also maintain an audit log for every time somebody actually accesses data, especially that data that has PII in it, so you can always trace back what your users in Amperity are doing. Next, I wanted to talk about data lineage. And something to consider here, right, is how all of your data connects to each other at a granular level. Being able to view what source data feeds into the things that you're taking out of your system is really important, especially around being confident to make changes in a system. That's something that I focus on a lot. People always ask me, if I change one thing, how will that impact something else? How do I know that I'm not going to break my campaigns if I change something in my feeds or change something in my sources? At Amperity, we actually offer data lineage, starting at that feed level where you can see all of your feeds and see how they feed into tables downstream. We let you filter this. We let you kind of scope down to be able to view just how one table might feed into a lot. So you can see starting to filter, and then I can see if I go and change that feed, will that impact a database table, or eventually will that impact a campaign that I'm sending out or query that I'm running. And then another one here is around syncing compatibility. And this is specifically around syncing to downstream systems. One of the questions that I was thinking about when I was creating this presentation is how is customer data ops different than regular data ops? And one of the big things that kind of stuck out is the types of destinations that we're sending data to. We're sending to specific destinations like Klaviyo or Breeze that expect data to be written in a very specific format and done in a very specific way. And so whatever tool you're using needs to make sure that your data is correctly formatted, it's correctly transformed in order to be delivered to these destinations successfully. So at Amperity, hopefully you guys all know this, but we have hundreds of destinations you can connect to. And we really help you select the one that you want to send to and then get your data set up successfully to send to that destination. And if for some reason something doesn't actually work, we let you set up workflow alerts where you can actually put in any email that you want that will send to somebody immediately when something fails. So we're trying to have the most minimal lead time between when something fails to when somebody gets alerted, and then so when they can actually fix that error. So in addition to having the workflow alerts if something fails, we also show, as you can see over here, some one-click resolutions where you can actually rerun something with one click. What this does is it reduces the knowledge that's required for somebody to go in and resolve errors. So before, where you maybe had to have an engineer or you had to have somebody that was really, really, really close to that data architecture be the one who was resolving those errors, now you can actually have somebody go in, see some resolutions, and run the right one and see if it actually works. If not, somebody will get alerted again, and they will try again. Next, I wanted to talk through data quality. This is really, really, really important. This is all about making sure that at every stage of that cycle that we talked about, you need to make sure that that data is exactly what you expect it to be. As new data is added, you need to make sure that you can set thresholds, you can make sure your data is accurate, again, at any stage. So at Amperity, we have validations at a lot of different stages. The one that I want to showcase today is our new Customer 360 validation report. This is really able to show and help you configure where you want to be alerted if your data isn't as expected. Sorry, this is a very fast scroll, but one of the things on here is making sure that if I have some price for my product and I have a discount and then a discount price for my product, is the discount actually less than the original price? Probably something that we should be thinking about. And so there's a bunch of checks in here where you can kind of enable alerting on those data quality pieces, which is really, really important and kind of something that you don't want to be doing manually. We automate all of that for you. And again, you can set those thresholds. You can opt out of different alerts. You can ignore them altogether if you want. And then another piece too that I wanted to call out is our query alerting. So making it really easy to kind of opt in or opt out when a query that you've written is now returning way more rows than you expect, or way less rows than you expect. Maybe 0, might not be good. And so same thing as we were talking about alerting for workflow alerts, same thing for queries. So it makes it really, really easy and really seamless, and it actually comes to you when something goes wrong instead of you having to go into the platform and find it yourself. And then lastly, again, on change management, this is huge. Again, things change. It will change. If it doesn't change, then you're probably missing something. So source systems will get new data, right? Destination systems change. APIs change. You need to continue to maintain parity between all of these things in your architecture. Marketing teams ask things to the IT team. The IT team asks things to marketing teams. That's kind of what happens here, right? What I'm really, really excited to showcase today is our Sandbox experience. Amperity have had sandboxes for a while, but now you can actually create them and handle them and manage them all on your own. So what is a sandbox? A sandbox is actually a complete replicated environment of your production tenant. Your production tenant is the place where you are sending data into Amperity, you're manipulating all of that data, and you're sending data out of Amperity. But what happens when I want to make a change? How do I know that I'm not going to actually break something in that production tenant and then break everything downstream? You can create a sandbox, and it creates a really, really quick, in less than a minute, less than 30 seconds, create a copy of your environment. You can run some changes. You can test those. We actually help validate against those changes, where we make sure that you're not messing up any dependencies between tables. And then you can promote those changes back to production, and it's as easy as that. So I'm actually going to showcase a bit more in depth of a demo than the ones that I have right here, where you'll see me actually go and create a sandbox. All right, so here I am in a production environment. I can't actually edit any feeds or any tables. My permission doesn't let me because my boss thinks I'm going to mess stuff up. So I am, sorry, Lise. So here I am, I'm creating a sandbox, and that's actually going to let me make changes that I actually need to make. For me, I'm actually looking to change a field from phone to home phone. I'm going to start to differentiate cell phone and home phone. So I'm creating a sandbox so that I can make that change and I can test that change out. So I just created my sandbox, super quick, super easy. I'm able to actually change the name and the description of that sandbox, which is really nice if I end up kind of changing what I was going to use my sandbox for. I can see when I last ran a workflow. I can see if there's any changes I haven't merged back into production. And then I can go and I can access that sandbox. And when I access my sandbox, you'll see that everything's actually exactly the same. It's a different color. And I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to change my query. Because I can. I can now edit things. I can now add feeds. I can add tables. So I have the edit button enabled now in my sandbox. I'm going to change my field from phone to home phone. And I'm going to save that. And I'm going to see kind of what my sandbox tells me about me changing that field. I'm going to save my changes. It's now checking my sandbox for errors. This is huge. We're basically running integration tests from front to end of your entire tenant to see if you're missing any dependencies or not. And I can easily see what exactly I changed in my sandbox so far. I can go to a version history page. I can also see what I changed in my sandbox. We're really trying to be transparent about the changes that you're making or your coworkers are making so you can trace out errors over time. And you can really not blame somebody, but maybe if they made a change that impacts your workflow. So now you can see I'm still checking for errors, and I have one. This error is basically telling me that I have a query that's missing the field So I go and I click that, and it actually tells me exactly why I'm seeing this error and exact steps that I can take to get this error gone, because I don't want this error. I don't like it. So it's telling me that my query is part of an orchestration that's getting sent daily. So basically, this query is like trying to get sent out every single day. And if there's an error, that's not going to happen, and I want to avoid errors. So I went and I actually could easily click into the version where I actually made that change. And then I'm going to go down to the query that's actually getting sent out every day. And I'm going to take a look at it. I'm going to see what's going on. So I can see that it's getting sent daily after my courier group. So I'm actually just going to edit it and make it run manually. I don't need this data to be sent out. I don't want to delete it yet, though. But I know I'm like kind of in the middle of a project, and I want to save it for a rainy day. So now my Sandbox is rechecking for errors because I made another change. Completed. So now my error is actually a warning. It's still saying, hey, you still have a query that has a field that changed. It's still being used downstream, but it's not getting sent out every day. So you can promote this. We don't think that there's going to be any workflows coming up that's going to fail, so you're good, just FYI. Now I want to promote my Sandbox. I created a message explaining my changes, and then I can promote my Sandbox and easily delete it in one click. So I just merged that change back into my production environment. I get redirected there. And then if I go to my version history, I can actually see the exact change that I merged in from my Sandbox into production, which are those two things, right? It was changing that database table, changing that field from phone to home phone, and then changing my orchestration group to not run every single day so that I'm not hitting any errors. Great. So that was the demo. There's so much stuff in Amperity that we've been focusing on, again, on making it easier and faster for our operators and our implementers and really anybody at Amperity to make more confident changes and assess and understand the impact of the changes that they're making. So there's a ton of benefits here for everybody, but for our IT teams, this is really trying to reduce strain on them, reduce the cognitive load, the things that they need to think about, less time for them to actually debug things and more time focused on building. For a non-IT team, right, this helps bring our marketing teams closer to our data teams where we can actually see the changes that everybody is making in one place instead of trying to email, Teams, Slack, text, call, whatever, to find out what somebody is doing and why they did it. And then from an overall process perspective, right, we want it to be easier to fix changes, know about those changes, and just be more transparent overall. And so when we think about customer data ops, again, focusing on those problems that matter, but also what impact a change will make is really, really important when we think about our overall data architecture and our overall data stack. So I'm really excited about the changes that Amperity has been making, and I'm hoping that everyone's able to utilize them. So that's it. Not right now. For SSO we can, for logins you can. In terms of if you were trying to map over like role-based access control into Amperity, you would have to do that manually in Amperity. But we do offer SSO integrations pretty seamlessly. Yeah.
For data sources, is there a list of connectors that you guys have built out and where you could see what data sources you've already built connectors for?
Yes, we do. It's on our website, I believe. It's on the doc site.
For the sandboxes, I noticed that you as the user have to create it. So I guess one of the questions that naturally popped in my head, what if another user creates one and at the same time you guys are publishing conflicting changes?
Yeah, great question. I wish I planted that. So you can make as many sandboxes as you want right now in the tenant. If somebody promotes a change and you pull a change down, are you familiar with Git branches and version control in that way? Okay, so if you pull down a change from production into your sandbox and it actually conflicts with the change that you made, we basically prompt you to pick, do you want to keep the changes that you've made in your sandbox, or do you want to override the changes that somebody promoted into production? Sandboxes can't talk to each other, but they can talk to the parent tenant, if that makes sense.
I think so. What you're saying is
I wish I had a whiteboard.
It would be caught, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it would be caught, yeah.
It just means you might have to just pull a second. You might pull and be like, wait a minute, it changed again. You have to pull again.
Yeah.
Right again.
Yeah, and then we have a couple different policies too. So I, as a data grid operator, can create a sandbox. If I'm a sandbox admin, I can actually see all of the sandboxes within the tenant, and I can actually kind of take a look into all of them and see what's going on, which is a pretty elevated role to be able to check those out.
In my head, I guess, initially before I started reading some of your documentation, I had it in my head that there was just one sandbox. So is that a way to work in Amperity to just have one sandbox that everybody works in, or Yeah.
So yeah, so you can. We recommend having sandboxes be pretty like short-lived. So you're creating a sandbox, promoting your changes, and tearing it down. And the reason why is because when you create a sandbox, you're actually kind of pointing to the data at the time of production from when you created your sandbox. So the longer you keep your sandbox, the farther out of date of production you're going to be, and you have to ingest new data.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. We have a lot of companies who basically have a sandbox for every project, and then when they're ready, they promote it, and it's pretty easy. All right. I think we're at time. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.